Hello everyone, happy October. Today is the Daily News Currents, and today is Tuesday, October 1st. For today's headlines, we have America's Nobel goes to a power couple who made a startling discovery about HIV. U.S. to hand over pest inspections of Mexican avocados to Mexico. The truth about tuna, how much you should worry about mercury in tuna and other seafood, experts weigh in. What to know about the Axis of Resistance, the Iran-backed militia network. And Georgia's 6-week abortion ban is struck down. The ruling is unlikely to be the final word on abortion access in the state. America's Nobel goes to a power couple who made a startling discovery about HIV. In the early days of the AIDS epidemic, back in the 1980s, the virus was seen as a threat mainly to gay men. South African husband and wife researchers Salim and Korisha Abdul Karim changed the narrative with their groundbreaking research. They discovered that in South Africa, young women had a high rate of HIV, and then they did something about it. The couple met at university over a temperature-controlled ultra-centrifuge and fell in love. It was a whirlwind romance. A week later, Salim was headed to Columbia University in New York. They persisted with a long-distance relationship, and just months later were married, with Korisha going on to join Salim at Columbia. Last week, after decades of partnership in and out of the lab, the epidemiologists received the prestigious Lasker Prize, often referred to as America's Nobel, for their life-saving HIV research. The power couple won the prize in the public service category for eliminating key drivers of heterosexual HIV transmission, introducing life-saving approaches to prevent and treat HIV, and statesmanship in public health policy and advocacy. The Lasker Foundation said in a statement, "The honor comes with a $250,000 award." Growing up as South African Indians under the brutal apartheid system of white minority rule, the Abdul Karims faced discrimination and segregation and had limited education opportunities. Despite this, Salim and Korisha, who were both active in the anti-apartheid movement, went on and became two of the foremost scientists of their generation. One of the major findings came in the early days of the HIV pandemic in the 1980s, when the disease was seen in the U.S. and Western countries as predominantly affecting gay men. The Abdul Karims found in their home country it was predominantly women in their teens getting infected by older men. The couple set out to find a way for these women to protect themselves, a challenging task. After almost 2 decades of research, the Abdul Karims had their breakthrough. The trials of a drug called Tenofovir showed that when used as a vaginal gel, it could help prevent HIV transmission to women. South Africa has one of the highest numbers of people living with HIV, an estimated 8 million, but almost 80% of them are now on antiretroviral drugs. New infections have dropped significantly from a peak of around 500,000 in 2000 to 150,000 last year. The Abdul Karim's work has contributed in no small part to these successes, according to the Lasker Foundation. NPR spoke to the Abdul Karims hours before they attended the prize ceremony in New York on Friday. The interview has been edited for length and clarity. What barriers did you face entering the sciences in apartheid South Africa? Growing up in apartheid South Africa, with hindsight, is something of a surreal experience. We lived in an area where only Indian people lived. When we went to the post office, we entered by the door that said non-whites. When we went to the parks, we sat on the benches that said non-whites. Living in that kind of situation, the message you get over and over and over is that you're not good enough and you're inferior because you are not white. And having grown up in that kind of environment, it was almost a challenge for us to say, actually, we are good enough. And eventually I went to medical school at the University of Natal, which at that stage was the only medical school for Black students, and became an anti-apartheid activist and joined the struggle for freedom. And having graduated as a young doctor, I decided to specialize in virology. Croatia. Maybe I'll add a little bit because I was growing up on the north coast, north of Durban. It is in the middle of the sugarcane plantains. My great-grandparents came as part of the Indians from India brought to South Africa in 1860 to work on the sugarcane plantains or the coal mines. But my family really valued education. When I finished high school in 1976, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, so I went to the University of Durban and did my BSc, Bachelor of Science degree. And during that time, as I was studying biochemistry and microbiology, there was an emerging understanding of immunology. You have both studied in the States, then returned to South Africa in the early days of HIV/AIDS. What difference did you see between the two countries? Salim. What became very clear to us in New York was that HIV was going to be a big problem in Africa. When we came back to South Africa at the end of 1988, we decided that we would pursue research in HIV, and that pretty much defined the rest of our 35 years of research together. And that's when you made the startling discovery about HIV. Salim. Our study that we did back in 1989-1990 produced data that took us quite by surprise. When we looked at the information from this large community survey, we found that in teenage boys, the prevalence of HIV was quite low. But if you looked at teenage girls, they had very high rates of infection, 6 to 8% of women between ages 15 and 24, compared to 2 or less of males the same age. However, the rate among men in the 1990 study rises as they get into their mid to late 20s. That was a signal that these young women were not acquiring HIV from teenage boys. They were acquiring HIV from men who were about 10 years older. And so that started for us a whole research program to understand this age-disparate sex, and essentially laid the basis for research that we focused on, which is how we can develop technology that would empower women to protect themselves from HIV, because condoms are under the control of men. What barriers did you face entering the sciences in apartheid South Africa? Salim. Growing up in apartheid South Africa with hindsight is... it must have repeated. Describe what your breakthrough with tenofovir gel was and how that research progressed since. Salim. It took 18 years of research before we produced a successful outcome, and when we announced in 2010 that we had shown that this drug called tenofovir, invented in the 1970s, protected women against HIV when used in a gel applied vaginally before and after sex. It provided a new hope for the field of HIV at the time. The issue was that the gel was more expensive to make and didn't have the same level of protection as the tablets of tenofovir. So it turned out that taking tenofovir pills was as good and sometimes better than the gel and cheaper. And that's what led eventually to 2015 to the World Health Organization recommendation that tenofovir containing pre-exposure prophylaxis PrEP be offered to all individuals at high risk of infection. Were there any challenges in getting these young women to take the pill? Salim. Our problem was that young women were not overly keen to go and stand in a long queue at a clinic to collect tablets to take to prevent a disease that they didn't have. And it became a real challenge for us to uptake of tenofovir PrEP was quite low, and even those who were taking tenofovir tablets for pre-exposure prophylaxis, after a while, they just stopped taking it. So we started a whole new research program to look at developing technologies that were long-acting. South Africa's second Democratic president, Thabo Mbeki, engaged in AIDS denialism while the country was in the middle of an epidemic. That must have been disappointing to see. Salim. It came as a moral blow, in a way of when Mbeki took over for President Mandela. He dallied with these kinds of dentalists and was influenced by their thinking, and started espousing these falsehoods and these disinformation about HIV that was not the cause of AIDS. And we as scientists certainly could not just let that lie. We had to ensure that the public was aware of what the factual situation was. I was the head of AIDS research at the Medical Research Council at the time, so I was often quoted in the media challenging the president, and so were many others. Croatia. It was particularly painful in a time when we started doing AIDS research in South Africa. We were dealing with a silent epidemic, and at the time Mbeki comes in, we're starting to see the face of AIDS, where there were people dying all around us in large numbers. And in 2000, when we hosted the International AIDS Conference, this is coinciding with the president, the democratically elected president, challenging this. This year, you've been working on a new study with another drug, lenacapavir, that's shown impressive results. Salim. That study showed that if you take the injectable of lenacapavirine every 6 months, it was highly effective. In fact, there were no infections in women who took this injection. Young women could come in just once every 6 months, get an injection, and they don't need to be concerned about the risk of HIV until they are due for the next injection 6 months later. There is a heated debate over the presumed high cost of the injectable. What we hope will be done is when it's licensed, it's not yet licensed, is that there will be a kind of access program that would enable poor countries to access lenacapavirine at a low cost. What are you going to do with the prize money, and what's next for you both? The prize money will be used for research and/or training of students. We are now working on the annual long-acting prevention technology so that women will only need to have it once a year. This could be in the form of a matchstick-sized implant that has enough tenofovir in it to release slowly over the entire year so that young girls don't have to think about prophylaxis. And to end on a lighter note, Salim, you're widely known by your nickname, Slim. Where does it come from? Salim: I acquired this nickname in high school when my Afrikaans teacher told me, "G think G is slim. You think you are clever?" in response to some cheeky comment I must have made. Since my name is Salim, dropping the A made a single syllable. I was a top student in class, and I was quite renowned, so for multiple reasons, her referring to me as Slim just stuck. U.S. to hand over pest inspections of Mexican avocados to Mexico. California avocado growers are fuming this week about a U.S. decision to hand over pest inspections of Mexican orchards to the Mexican government. Inspectors hired by the U.S. Department of Agriculture have been guarding against imports of avocados infected with insects and disease since 1997, but they have also been threatened in Mexico for refusing to certify deceptive shipments in recent years. Threats and violence against inspectors has caused the U.S. to suspend inspections in the past, and California growers question whether Mexico's own inspectors would be better equipped to withstand such pressure. This action reverses the long-established inspection process designed to prevent invasions of known pests in Mexico that could devastate our industry, the California Avocado Commission wrote in an open letter to the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack on Monday. At present, inspectors work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Animals and Plant Health Inspection Services, known as APHIS. Because the United States also grows avocados, U.S. inspectors observe orchards and packing houses in Mexico to ensure exported avocados don't carry pests that could hurt U.S. crops. It is well known that their physical presence greatly reduces the opportunity of others to game the system, the Avocado Commission wrote. What assurances can APHIS provide us is that its unilateral reversal of the processes will be equal to or better than what has protected us. The letter added, "We are looking for specifics as to why you have concluded that substituting APHIS inspectors with Mexican government inspectors is in our best interest." The decision was announced last week in a short statement by Mexico's Agriculture Department that claimed that with this agreement, the U.S. Health Safety Agency is recognizing the commitment of Mexican growers who in more than 27 years have not had any sanitary problems in exports. The idea that there has been no problems is far from the truth. In 2022, inspections were halted after one of the U.S. inspectors was threatened in a western state of Michoacan, where growers are routinely subject to extortion by drug cartels. Only the states in Michoacan and Jalisco are certified to export avocados to the United States. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said at the time the inspector had received a threat against him and his family. The inspector had questioned the integrity of a certain shipment and refused to certify it based on concrete issues, according to the USDA statement. Some packers in Mexico buy avocados from other non-certified states and try to pass them off as being from Michoacan. Sources at the time said the 2022 threat involved a grower demanding that inspectors certify more avocados than his orchard was physically capable of producing, suggesting that at least some had been smuggled in from elsewhere. And in June, 2 USDA employees were insulted and temporarily held by assailants in Michoacan. That led to the U.S. to suspend inspections in Mexico's biggest avocado-producing state. The U.S. Department of Agriculture did not immediately respond to questions about why the decision was made or whether it was related to the threats. Mexico currently supplies about 80% of U.S. imports of the fruit. Growers in the U.S. cannot supply the country's whole demand, nor provide fruit year-round. Is tuna healthy? The truth about tuna. How much should you worry about mercury in tuna and other seafood? Experts weigh in. Ahi steak, akimi sashimi, albacore on sourdough. Whether you smoked yellowfin on the grill or spread skipjack on a sandwich, chances are you've had tuna recently. On average, Americans eat around 2 pounds of the fish per year, more than any other seafood except for shrimp and salmon. And for good reason. Tuna is tasty and versatile, and the canned variety costs as little as $1. But is it good for you? Should you be worried about its mercury content? And what about the health of our oceans? Here's what to know before you pop open the next can for lunch. Is tuna healthy? Tuna is about as nutritious as food can be. It is packed with protein, minerals, and vitamins, said Chris Volgilano, a dietitian and research director at the educational nonprofit Food and Planet. It has more selenium than just about any other meat. It is also low in fat, Dr. Voglano noted, but that means it has fewer omega 3 fatty acids than some other seafood. There is not a huge nutritional difference between canned tuna, sushi, and tuna steak, he added. Cooking the fish might lower its vitamin D, and the canning process might leach out a few nutrients, he said, but its nutritional value is largely the same. Tuna's one big health drawback, experts say, is the risk posed by mercury, a neurotoxin. This heavy metal enters the ocean mostly from human activities, like burning fossil fuels. It is absorbed by small organisms and works its way up the food chain and accumulates in bigger, long-lived species like sharks, swordfish, and yes, tuna. In high enough concentrations, mercury can cause serious health problems. Cases of mercury poisoning are rare in the United States, but experts worry about the long-term effects of mercury on the brain, and elevated levels are often more common among urban and coastal populations that eat more seafood. So what does this mean for tuna eaters? The answer is nuanced because the amount of mercury depends on the species, and there are 15 types of tuna, all of which could end up on a dinner plate. The smallest, and often cheapest, like skipjack, have very little mercury. Albacore and yellowfin can have 3 times as much. Big eye and bluefin can have far more, Dr. Vogliano said. Because mercury is particularly dangerous for children and pregnant women, the Food and Drug Administration publishes seafood consumption guidelines for them. They recommend no more than 3 servings or 12 ounces a week of canned light tuna, or 1 serving of albacore or yellowfin if you're pregnant, and less for children under 12. Most other developed countries set lower bars, and many experts recommend that pregnant women and small children avoid the fish altogether. The FDA doesn't set the limits for the rest of us, but experts say a conservative choice would be to follow the same guidelines. People who eat tuna regularly do tend to have high mercury levels in their blood than those who don't, though the metal largely leaves the body after a few months. Even in rare confirmed cases of mercury poisoning from eating seafood, most patients recover after changing their diet. Experts wrestle with the fundamental tension at play with mercury and seafood, just as consumers do. There is no level that is risk-free, cautioned Tracy J. Woodruff, the Director of Environmental Research and Translation for Health at the University of California, San Francisco. On the other hand, there's evidence that eating fish may have brain benefits that outweighs the dangers. Dr. Woodruff summed it up. If you're a healthy adult and you eat it every once in a while, it's probably, maybe, not that big of a deal. Is eating tuna okay for the planet? If you were in China in the 1980s, you might remember that dolphins were once widely caught in tuna nets. Thanks to years of activism and reforms, this is no longer much of a problem. However, tuna fishing still takes a toll, especially abroad. Unlike salmon or shrimp, almost all tuna is caught in the wild. Smaller species like skipjack and albacore are netted in vast pert seines that trap other fish as well, ravaging entire ecosystems. Smaller tuna can be fished sustainably, though, when individual fishing lines are used, as they are increasingly for the higher-end products. Large tuna species pose a different problem. They aren't just very many fish. The biggest bluefin tuna, often shipped to Japanese markets, can be 12 feet long, weigh as much as a grand piano, and sell for over $1 million. Top predators like these will never be as plentiful as the mackerel or sardines they eat, and fishing has threatened them gravely. Pacific bluefin, probably the tuna at the greatest risk from overfishing, is at just 10% of its historical population. That's far better than the 2% it fell in 2010, but fishery experts worry that there still aren't enough to support wide consumption. Buying better tuna. To choose the most sustainable and safest tuna, start with the label. If I were to tell someone one thing, and they wanted to know how to eat sustainable tuna, go with the pole and line caught, or troll caught, said Andre Bostany, a fisheries biologist with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, who advises its seafood guidelines. A can of sustainable tuna fish will say something about how the animals were fished, by pole and line, by troll, or free school. This means that steps were taken to catch only the tuna as opposed to everything swimming nearby, that the fisheries were most likely well managed. If there was no mention of how the tuna was caught, or it says chunk light, that probably means it was caught in a purse-seine net and comes at a greater ecological cost. Sustainably caught canned tuna is generally more expensive, starting around $3 or $4, Dr. Bustany says, pointing to the stack of tins in his office that he uses for his lunch salads. But that's still pretty cheap for a meal, he added, and the quality tends to be better, since nets bruise the fish. As the fish counter and restaurants, many conservation experts say avoid bluefin, no matter how it's caught, but yellowfin, which also makes for beautiful steaks and sashimi, can be fished sustainably. Look for fish that's pole caught in the Pacific, experts say, or certified by a group like the Marine Stewardship Council. Avoid fish from the Indian Ocean, where fishing rules are poorly enforced, Dr. Botsany said. If your primary concern is mercury, the tuna species matters even more. Bluefin and big eye tend to have the most. Skipjack is your safest choice, while albacore, often labeled white, and yellowfin probably have more mercury. Cheaper light tuna is often a combination of skipjack and albacore, so shop carefully. Even the experts tuck in occasionally. I love a good tuna fish sandwich with some pickles and a bit of mayonnaise or some olive oil and lemon, said Dr. Volgano. I personally don't worry about the mercury because I'm not eating it every day. Dr. Woodruff sometimes orders tuna at sushi restaurants, but she tries to buy other fish at her local market. Have you had black cod? Freaking amazing, she said. It's small, and they catch it locally out here in California, so it's like a win-win-win fish. Georgia's six-week abortion ban is struck down. The ruling is likely to be the final word on abortion access in the state, with the expectation that the case will ultimately be decided by the Georgia Supreme Court. A Georgia judge on Monday struck down a state law effectively prohibiting abortions beyond 6 weeks of pregnancy. The ruling, by Judge Robert C.I. McBurney of Fulton County Superior Court, is likely to be the final word because of the expectation that the case will ultimately be decided by the Georgia Supreme Court. Still, the ruling means that women seeking abortions in Georgia will have greater access, at least temporarily, to a procedure that has become mostly inaccessible in the South since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. Judge McBurney found that the 6-week abortion ban, which was passed in 2019, violated Georgia's constitution, and his ruling returns the state to allowing the procedure up to about 22 weeks of pregnancy. A review of our higher court's interpretations of liberty demonstrates that liberty in Georgia includes in its meaning, in its protections, and its bundle of rights the power of a woman to control her own body, to decide what happens to it and in it, and to reject state interference with her health care choices, Judge McBurney wrote in his 26-page ruling. That power is not, however, unlimited, the judge continued. When a fetus growing inside a woman reaches viability, when society can assume care and responsibility for that separate life, then and only then may society intervene. When the U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs decision revoked the federal constitutional right to abortion in 2022, it kicked the question of abortion to the states to regulate. Since then, many of them have enacted abortion bans, and many lawsuits have been filed to challenge those bans, with abortion rights lawyers arguing that the prohibitions are unconstitutional under state guarantees of privacy, health, liberty, or family planning. What has made the Georgia case notable is that the state's legislature approved the prohibition on abortion just after 6 weeks, a point when most women have not yet realized they are pregnant, in 2019, 3 years before the Dobbs decision. Last year, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld the law, the Living Infant Fairness and Equality Act, known as the LIFE Act, rejecting arguments made by doctors and advocacy groups that the law was void and unconstitutional when the state legislators approved it. But the court sent the case back to a lower court on the question of whether the state's constitution protects the right to privacy and whether the right encompasses abortion, setting the stage for Judge McBurney's ruling on Monday. Shortly after the judge issued the ruling, the state indicated that it would appeal the case directly to the state Supreme Court. We believe Georgia's LIFE Act is fully constitutional, and we will immediately appeal the lower court's decision, said Kara Murray, a spokeswoman for Chris Carr, a Republican who is Georgia's Attorney General. The protracted battle in the courts most likely means that abortion will remain a major campaign focus in Georgia, a crucial swing state in the 2024 race, particularly for the Vice President Kamala Harris. Ms. Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, traveled to Georgia a couple weeks ago to visit the family of Amber Nicole Thurman, a Georgia woman who died of sepsis after waiting more than 20 hours for medical care to treat an incomplete medical abortion. Ms. Thurman and another woman, Candy Miller, died after delays in medical care tied to state abortion restrictions, according to reporting by ProPublica. Their deaths occurred in the months after Georgia's law went into effect. In a conference call after Monday's ruling, abortion providers and advocates hailed the ruling but also sounded a cautionary note. Make no mistake, we still have a long way to go, said Monica Simpson, executive director of the SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, which brought the Georgia case. This victory is one necessary step in our fight to champion bodily autonomy. We'll read our other article tomorrow. Thank you so much. Goodbye.